Hello.
Hi.
Good. How are you?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Amazing.
How are you?
I'm good. And yourself?
Good. I'm fine, thanks.
So we do have Lily coming here in a little bit. She should be here any minute now.
Yeah, no problem.
But yeah, we will
So,
see.
how is it going this semester? What grade? What year are you in?
I'm in fourth year.
So you're coming up to finishing.
Yeah, this May I'll be done and out, which is exciting. But the semester's been good. It's different, but
Yeah. How have you found? Because I'm always on the other side, so I always try to get from students how they find it as student having to work in an all online environment.
it was a learning curve at the beginning. But I feel like as soon as I got myself into a routine, then it just felt like going to classes. Like now that I'm sort of
Yeah.
in I don't know, the middle of all of it.
Yeah. Hi, Lily.
Hi, thanks so much for being here.
No problem. I like your background. I need some of those lights.
Thank you.
Yeah, I found talking with the students that some of them it's the motivation side that seemed to be a bit hard, because you're kind of moving from your bedroom in case of some it's actually in their bedroom, but it's actually separating themselves, make it kind of hard to motivate themselves to deal with their courses. But so I'm glad you've adjusted. Have you adjusted, Lily?
I have. I think that it definitely was an adjustment for sure. But luckily, I've been okay, and I've managed to, keep up my motivation and keep up my grades. But yeah, it's definitely not as fun as going to campus. I absolutely love campus. I think UVic's a beautiful campus, and I really
Yeah.
like the feeling of being there. I was there yesterday, just studying in one of the open places that is open right now, and it's just like it felt so good to be on campus, but it also was kind of sad because like nobody else was there and just like missing that energy. So yeah, it's definitely an adjustment, but I feel like I'm very, very grateful that my mental health has not been super affected.
That's
I
good.
know that a lot of people have been affected by it, and like rightfully so. It's a really hard time, but I feel grateful that I haven't. So
Is a support system in terms of the health services available for students at UVic?
there are, and some of them are really good, but some of them definitely need to be improved. For
Yeah.
example, if you want to see a counselor on campus, usually you can only get in like once every 2 weeks
Yeah.
at most. And that's usually if your case is like dire. If it's not, then it's usually only about once a month. So
Yeah.
like for me, I am lucky enough I had insurance to go seek counseling services off campus. And for
Right.
students who have that, that's wonderful, but not all students do. So
Yeah.
I think that they definitely could improve in certain aspects, like how many counselors are available. But there's other things that they're doing really well.
Yeah. I have to agree. I think even before COVID, it's one of the areas I always felt that institutions, universities should get better at doing, because they're kind of structured on the 9 to 5 scenario. And it's like a lot of classes are evening classes, and, students and faculty as well run into difficulties and need to touch base with somebody now, not 2 weeks from now. They're feeling anxious or out of sync now. So 2 weeks or, 4 weeks from now just isn't meeting it. And it's one of those that I would like to see improve, because I think it exists, at least at the institution that I work at. I think there are issues with it, and it sounds like it's the same issue at UVic as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It needs to be more widely available. And of course, it's great that there are things like hotlines you can call and like things you can call, but those are usually through the government rather than through your institution. And I feel like with such a huge institution, there should be like more capability to have those resources for students more widely available.
What's your sense of the hotline? Do you think students use it? Because you might get somebody who's in Ontario or somewhere else, right? They're not necessarily in BC. or even in your own city?
Yeah, absolutely. I've never used it personally. I think that in really dire situations, it's something that is important to have, because if it can save somebody's life or help them through a really hard time, then that's always going to be something that I promote and think is important. But I also think that there should be like more widely available, like, I know right now with COVID it's hard to do these things, but more widely available like walk-in centers
Yeah,
for mental health, the same way that there are walk-in centers for doctors,
right.
more chances to go and like meet somebody, and more resources available to match you with the perfect person. Like, it can take a long time to find a therapist that works
That's true.
perfectly for you. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's true. No,
Yeah. And I
yeah,
sort of agree when you said like the hotline is sort of like dire situations. I feel like most people wouldn't like call it if it was just like they were feeling like anxious or overwhelmed, like something that they might not consider to the level of like a hotline. And so I feel like having like a institutional level one might like make it a bit more accessible in that way.
I think I would agree with that. I think it's really hard if a person is feeling vulnerable and all of those, and is in a crisis, to talk to somebody that they have no connection with at all is really difficult, right? But yeah, one of those things I guess we still have to work on in the universities and colleges. Anyway, ladies, I'm all at your disposal for however time that you wanted to talk with me.
Yeah. And before we get started, is there any sort of questions that you had uh, about the process or anything before or after?
No, I mean, when I initially contacted you guys, and sent the email, was at the time when we're looking at elections, and I guess part of it will go into me talking with you about some of the things that I'm trying to do, but it's initially was trying to figure out, and I've always had this for a long time, and I haven't been able to kind of put it into a concrete pattern or a package, is around trying to nurture young leaders. I mean, especially for women, because there are massive gaps in trying to get them into um, any kind of leadership role, be it on boards or participating in any of the election at municipal level. And so it's always about how do we reach out to young people and get them into the process. And unfortunately, I seem to think about it more when elections come up, and I go, are you serious? In this entire province where we have more women than men, and we still can't find, young women or women at any age, but at least women. And then what about all of, individuals like yourselves that are on campus? And I remember going in and speaking there's a poster behind me of one of the clubs that were set up at Langara, and they'd asked me to come and talk to them. And what was really great about it was being driven by young women in terms of project management, but also reaching out in terms of leadership. And it was really great to see. But then once they graduate, then it's there's a gap. And it's like, how do we maintain that kind of connectivity to ensure that they stick with it and really step up? So that's kind of where my headspace was on when I initially made contact with you guys, because I wanted to find out what you were doing, and are there ways that we can encourage more young women to participate in the electoral process? And the challenge for me is, and it was again when I ran, because I ran for MLA in Surrey South this past election. And so it's like, let's try and bring someone on board that isn't in their 50s, that is actually on their way through the system, because then what you have is this massive void. And then they kind of quickly get people, but it's like, we need to nurture them through that rather than doing it just kind of last minute and throw them in the deep end. And so I kind of wanted to find out what Editor was doing, and how do we help encourage what you're doing, and whether you guys have are kind of politically aligned, or whether it's more just, you know, a mixed bag of just strengthening and getting young women into leadership positions.
Yeah, this last little bit, I think you are our fifth or sixth speaker. We've kind of done all, yeah, we're kind of covering all leadership positions. And so I agree that there is sort of that gap between all this excitement that happens in university of getting involved and becoming a director of your club and all of those things, and then sort of the after.
Yeah.
And so I also don't really have any concrete ideas of how to do that, but I think it's definitely a very interesting conversation.
It's out in the universe.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of it, like, I think you're right when it says that, like, it comes down to a lot of like election things, because I like worked on promoting voting and getting I worked as part of a program called Get Out the Vote in 2019 for the federal election.
Oh yeah.
And it was part through electorates. Actually, the first time I really got like engaged with the club, because I'd been abroad the year before, but I was also doing it through a role with the undergrads of political science course union. And I think that what was really exciting to me was telling all these people about the candidates. And I think that that was the first time a lot of people heard these names of the people who were running. And I think, especially for university students, like, they might remember the 2015 election, but they probably didn't know like who was running in the area, who their MP is. They probably knew like who Justin Trudeau is, who Stephen Harper was, and stuff like that. But they didn't know like the names of their local candidates because they weren't voting. Most of them weren't voting age. I wasn't voting age in 2015. I was 17 and I was just a nerd, and so I like followed it, but mostly out of just like the fact that I've always been engaged with politics, and I know that I'm kind of an anomaly in that area. So it's really exciting to kind of engage with like university students for the first time, because they actually could vote this time, and so they need to learn who the candidates were, and maybe they knew the candidate back where they lived, but now they've moved to Victoria, so they need to learn who the candidates are here. And it was really exciting, and I think elections are a really great time to do that, and especially promote a lot of women who run, because as we know, there was actually more women who ran in this last provincial election, but still more men got elected. And you know, that's so there is a lot of women getting engaged with politics. It's just unfortunate that the system still often like runs women in ridings where they can't win, or they don't have as high a chance of winning, or they run them against like strong incumbents who are male, or in ridings that are not strongholds by that specific party or something like that. And so, but I do think it's a great way, like elections are a great way to get names out and to like learn about people and women who are in politics. But I think what our club is really trying to do is trying to put a spotlight on those women when elections aren't going on, and also spotlight on women who aren't in like prominent, like who aren't MLAs or MPs or running for those roles. So in this interview series, I believe you're actually the first person we're interviewing who's run for like a seat in the legislature. Correct me if I'm wrong, Madeline. Everybody else has been like people who work in journalism, people who work in bureaucracy, people who work in advocacy, like other roles that are related to politics but aren't like what you immediately think of when you think of a politician. And I think that putting the spotlight on those women as well is really a great way to expose women to all the possibilities there are in politics. Like, you don't have to be an MP in order to be in politics. There's so many other ways you can be involved, and really putting spotlights on that has been one of our goals.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, and for a long time, I'm mostly in management and in professional type of positions and stuff. But what so I lived in the United Arab Emirates for 12 years, where I was advising the government there. And I realized there what we've taken for granted here. So here we just assume that if an individual wants to run, they'll just run, or they will, you know, and oftentimes for us, it starts back in high school or university, right, where we get involved, and then it carries on, unless we are from a family that really encouraged community activism. And so there was that aspect, and I realized that they didn't even have it. They were just starting to talk about women, you know, being in government. It just wasn't thought of, wasn't heard of, because they weren't kind of expected to be out there and in any kind of position of authority, or even just to sit in their local council. It just, at least with Indigenous population here, the councils can be men and women. It had changed over the years. Over there just wasn't any of those things. And then when I lived in London, I was director of education with the Commonwealth. And so there were 54 Commonwealth countries. And so my job was to deal with ministers. And the interesting part, so in all these countries, the interesting part, there were hardly any women. But there were a few countries that really stood out for me, because the UN, they collect data on women and women in leadership positions and all of that. And so when they opened the department dealing with women's and women's issues, they were tracking the number of women that are in positions. And believe it or not, a country like Uganda, that have gone through crisis and have come out the other end, actually have more women in governments and in management position than developed countries like Canada and the US, right? And you kind of take a look at that and go, wait a minute, but I thought we were supposed to be ahead, you know, given our education system and all of that. And it just, for them, it was, they select individuals. There are issues with their system, but they select individuals they think can do the job. And in Canada, we have this, you know, you kind of have to put in your time. And then when you put that in, then you move ahead and those kinds of things. And I realized that we needed to do more in Canada. That when I came back home, it was, we need to really engage generally at the community level, because we're also missing women of color, we're missing Blacks, we're missing lots of Indigenous, the Indigenous population and new immigrants. And so it was a way of going, how do we get young people engaged? And we have to, I absolutely agree with you. My thing is get them engaged before the election, so that they know what's going on and they have a voice, and they can help direct the strategy that the groups are putting out, because usually there are no youth voice, just like they're also missing some of the, for lack of a better word, ethnic positions in terms of people of color and Blacks and Indigenous populations. So that's kind of where my brain was coming from, going, they're developing countries that are doing it much better than we are, and we need to get better at it. We have some of the highest educated young women in the world, and yet we seem to have these massive gaps in terms of management positions, in terms of being on boards and any of those things. And where we actually do find them are oftentimes in nonprofit organizations that are working on some of those social issues. But again, they're not getting the same salary as if you were in the bigger organizations or in management positions in those. I also worked as executive director in the downtown East Side Women's Center for a while. So I'm very much aware of what some of those social issues are. But it's now about how do we get some of those things starting within, you know, outside of elections, really, and help support them.
And sorry to put you on the spot, but like, what would you say would be some of those ways, or like things that you think do help increase sort of representation of women in these roles? Or
well, in terms of management positions, I think that the institutions generally and need to get better at supporting young women. You know, it's if all else is equal, because at the end of the day, we're talking about EDI, right? We're talking about equality, diversity, and inclusion. And it's about that organizations need to have programs in which they can take on young leaders and mentor them through their system, rather than, you know, at the end of the day going, no, we will select him because he's been there longer. So include some of those things. We have set up a number of policy globally with some of the international organizations to really develop their mentoring program and to have internship, and the focus being on recruiting young women so that they get experience in those positions. So in terms of the local organizations, I think it's still, we need to get better. And when I say we, it has to be a collective of individuals, but tapping into those leaders of companies to get them on board in terms of support and mentoring positions within their, and internship programs within their organizations. In terms of the political side of it, I think every political organization needs to have a policy. Well, it's more than a policy, it's actually have a plan by which to bring young leaders in. So when I ran for this last election, I'm always trying, don't we have young people to come on board? And what I like about Surrey South is that the Riding Association very much actively go out and recruit young people to come in and take up different positions and to work through that. That will guide them, that hopefully someday they will find that they might want to run. But it's about, you know, actively go out and find them, as opposed to kind of wait for them to go, oh, I think I will do that. You know, so I think that's another way of working with the actual political system if they want to get into that system. There are a number of community groups that exist that it's just a matter of assisting them with resources, financial resources that will encourage that kind of mentoring and internship to get them on their way. And we should start it, I think, when they're, you know, in positions like yourselves in the universities and in the colleges.
And how did you sort of get onto your path? You've listed a whole array of different positions already.
Oh, yeah. I don't know, boredom, maybe. I don't want to be bored. No, you know, I went, I think if thinking back, I mean, I did the high school thing. I ran for student council and all of that. And it was a way of wanted to have a voice at the table, that if you're questioning policy, that you need to kind of know, you know, actively. You didn't necessarily just have to elect the head of the basketball or the football team. You can actually elect someone that actually had some interest in it. So I did that for a bit. And then, but when I went to university, originally I didn't sign up for politics. I actually signed up for psychology. I wanted to be a psychologist. And I got to Western, and they only had experimental psych, you know, where they put the gerbil on the treadmill kind of thing. And it's like, no, I wanted to go where I talk to people. And so along the way, I realized that I was really interested in foreign affairs. And so I took the Foreign Service exam, and I realized I really like politics. I think, you know, I might check this out. And so once I changed my, my major, I went into politics, and so I signed up for political courses and thought, this is kind of interesting. And so I did that way in more kind of some of the issues, and with the intent of joining the foreign services. And then of course you realize that they wanted 3 or 4 languages. And back then, it's a long time ago, but back then they didn't actually post a lot of women into any kind of position of authority, any senior position. They were mostly working in Canada in foreign affairs, which means desk job, and you're the one doing all the research for the people who are going to deliver on the research. And I'm going, no, that's not what I want. I want to be the person at the front end. So that's kind of where it started. And then after that, I primarily worked in, I guess, advocacy type group, nonprofit organization, youth services. I was concerned about some of the social issues. So I ended up with a teaching degree, and I wanted to make sure that individuals who marginalize or who are having issues didn't drop out on that basis, that we provide support for them. So I did that, and worked with the Youth Services Bureau and the Elizabeth Fry Society, which looked at re-entry for women in, and a lot of them at the time were First Nations. And so I did that for a while. And in one of my teaching classes, I remember we had professors at the time that were delivering on these, on research that they were doing. And I felt that what they were delivering was significantly skewed, where if a young person or if a child failed, it was because of the women, or because they were single family, or because there were a variety of different things. And I wanted to challenge that. And I wanted to find out why so many young people were dropping out of school. So I decided to go and register for my Master's of Education. And there was a sign that said, I can't even remember what the statement, but if you want to find out more about whatever, then come and join our group. And it was to do a Master's in Criminal Psych. And it's like, okay, that was it. So I did that and then went, okay, that was really, really silly, because that's not exactly quite what I had in mind, but I have a real interest to learn. And so in taking Criminal Psych, my focus in essence got shifted. And I realized how skewed research can be. And when we see these numbers, I'm going, what do you mean it increased 500%? What does that mean? Those kinds of things. And so I focused on the criminal psych component, and did my research in what is now PTSD. At the time, it wasn't considered part of the DSM-3 assessment categories. But it was specifically focused on victimization and the adjustment issues and the lack of services and those kinds of things, and that we needed to change how the criminal justice system is set up to deal with victims and those kind of things. A lot of those things have since come in, but back then it was like, what is this thing? So I still claim that if I had only focused to publish my paper, I would have probably been a millionaire by now, but hey. Anyway, so that in a roundabout way, that's where all things kind of came back, and then focused on working in administration primarily, because I felt that more women needed to be there. And to be quite honest, one of the drive was also there were a lack of people of color in many of those positions. And we were getting more and more immigrants that we didn't have the tools to deal with. And so it was that kind of directed a bit of what guide some of the interests that I have around social development issues.
I'm just gonna jump in if it's okay, Madeline.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I was just wondering, because I and I'm sure a lot of people are very interested in foreign services, and I want to take the exam at one point. I know that obviously it's a different time now, and hopefully there's more placements for women now than there were back then. But can you give any recommendations for taking the exam, or is there anything that you would say you should know about foreign services before you take it? Because obviously you took the exam, but then you didn't really end up working in foreign services. So do you have any recommendations around that?
Yeah, in a way I did, because as my posting for in London with the Commonwealth was a diplomatic posting. So I actually got there just in a roundabout way, no straightforward, direction. I think that we do need more and more women in those positions, because in a lot of ways, they understand the social development type of issues. And I think we just come at it in a different way. But I think the way things are now, just working for the Canadian government in Ottawa isn't the only way to go through foreign service. We have a real global community now. So one of the most eye-opening experience was actually participating at the UN Congress. So I was a Commonwealth rep that would go, and that's where you get to meet all of these different people. So you're doing the same task, but not at that same level, or not in country, because what happens is that the ambassadors and high commissioners are chosen more politically, as opposed to the person with the most merit. It's their political appointment. But in working with some of the international organizations, they are actually based on merit. You still have to go through your government recommending you and all of that. It doesn't mean that one shouldn't join the the foreign services, but the focus there is about really understanding globalization, understanding the trends that are out there, understanding what are the issues and where Canada sits. I think we have, for a long time, we focused on Canada and the US, and the world is much bigger than that. And Canada has a lot, I think we were pulled back a bit during Harper's time, where we were removed from a lot of the global committees that we were sitting on, that they were looking to Canada for direction and to see how we do things. Because in Canada, we tend to do it more for the good of the society as opposed to a political direction. So even if, yeah, it will make a difference whether you're liberal or conservative, but at the end of the day, what we put out, we're putting out a perspective for Canada in terms of the good for the society, and we very much are open to helping others globally and being at the table. That we oftentimes become a balance between the extreme position of the US or Russia and the rest of the world. And so we were pulled back from that a bit, but I think that with Trudeau, we're gaining some of that back. We do have a voice at many of the tables. We have a voice globally in many of the major issues. And I think we deliver on the quality and the substance of what the information is about, and working as a collective, as opposed to this is my country's position and take it or leave it. So I think there are different ways in terms of individuals working within the foreign arm of Canada, and a lot of that is through many of the global organizations, and they give incredibly good experience. I think for anyone who wants to get into that side in terms of working globally to enhance or to share the Canadian perspective. Did I answer your question, Lily?
Yes, sorry, I thought Madeline might jump in with something, so I want to give her that opportunity. Yeah, absolutely, that's wonderful, wonderful advice. And I think that it's absolutely everything you said was true, because I've volunteered with quite a few NGOs, and they would give opportunities for people to like attend the CSW in New York City, like with the organization, and I never got to do that. But some of my colleagues, people I volunteered with, did, and I did get to do a few like other cool experiences through volunteering with the NGOs that I volunteered with. And so I think that you're absolutely right, that like there's multiple different ways to go through. And I think that's going back to our conversation earlier about like not just showing what women can do in politics during the elections. I think it's also important to show like what women can do in politics, you know, how you can get to your goal. It doesn't have to be this like straight line forward that you think it is. There's lots of other ways to like get there and ways to do what you want to do.
Yeah, I think also as well, the part that I have, to be quite honest, haven't quite figured out yet is how to access some of the funds, be it through government or through companies, to set up these internships to make sure that young people can actually go and experience that. So go and spend, 6 months or a year in Paris at the UN or with a number of these organizations, or with one of the African Union or something, just to give them that exposure and experience to see how those things work. It was a real eye-opener for me, and I've had lots of experience, but actually going to those things shows a different side. Now, it is procedural death to be quite honest. You know, they go in with binders this big and everything has to go through all the procedures. But if you bypass that and realize around the networking and the connections and the reality or the realization that our issues are the same, they're just in different boxes, if you like. In many of those, for Canada being a developed and a well-established economic system, we have procedures for dealing with them. And so in a lot of ways, we kind of take it for granted. And then you go there and realize many of these emerging economies or smaller countries, they're just now realizing what it means to actually live in a democratic community. And what does that mean? We automatically assume that in Canada, everyone understands what it means to live in a democratic community and a democratic country, but they really don't. And that is really visible when you have elections. Most people haven't a clue why it's important for them to vote, why it's important for them to know who is representing them. Because, you know, oftentimes it's either, I'm just going to vote on the day and it doesn't really matter, or I'm just not going to vote because I don't believe in politics. And it's like, but you're actually turning over your responsibility for yourself to somebody else. So unless you're actively engaged, then you can't have a say because somebody's acting on your behalf. And that's really what democracy is about. It's about understanding those kind of process and that everyone is actually, it's their right and that it means something. And I think sometimes we take it for granted, but globally, it's where you run into difficulty when you realize a lot of countries, they don't even have that right. They're just now working on that right. And we've had it for so long and not realizing how valuable it is, really.
I think it's also easy to forget that like women only got the right to vote in Canada 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And 100 years is not a long time at all. And so I think that, you know, promoting that element of the fact that like
it wasn't always there.
It wasn't always there. It wasn't always there. And it might not always be here. Hopefully,
Exactly.
it will, but we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. And yeah, I think that the voting is one of the most important things we can do as a community, as a country.
I know you've kind of touched on this throughout, but all of this sort of experience that you got, not just in different roles, but also in different countries, how do you think that sort of affected what you're doing now and sort of the work you've been doing as of late?
In terms of my teaching, I think I bring different perspective. I realize the importance of culture and the importance of human rights. The fact that we talk about human rights as kind of this general thing. And again, I think it's partly because we've taken it for granted. Of course we have human rights. And then when you start to unpack all of that, you go, what exactly does that really mean? And oftentimes in many countries that means vote, right? It's about voting because then we vote for the people we want to act on our behalf. I think what I bring to the classroom is more just different perspective, and that culture holds an incredibly important part in many individuals. In Canada, we operate in a very diverse community, but I don't think we really pay attention to it. I grew up in Ottawa, you know, I'm from Ontario, and I remember going through school, elementary school and high school as the only Black kid. And no one kind of knew where I came from. It was just, and so there was the assumption that I'm there because maybe my parent was an eye commissioner or an ambassador or something. And so I think for many years, I actually let them play around with that and didn't correct them because it gave me status, right? Even though I had none. And the fact that my dad was from Nova Scotia, my mom is from Jamaica, and it was one of those things because people say to me, well, where are you from? And I say, Ottawa. And they go, no, where are you from? And it's like, okay, that's the only culture I know. but we've taken it for granted. You know, when we were younger, we did all the Christmas things, and we did Bonum, and, you know, skating on the canal and the festivals and all of those. But it was just kind of what we were. Like, they didn't have that ingrained, that it defined me, until I grew up and realized the moment someone tries to identify me as an American, and I had difficulty with this because when I was in the Middle East, I was there when the war was going on. And so I realized right away it was, no, I'm a Canadian, I'm not American, but they automatically assumed I was American. And so when I dealt with those individuals and try to get their perspective of why certain things are important to them, you realize that the base of it is around the role that culture plays for them, and why it's so important for many of them that, and in many cases, that cultural link is linked to religion of some kind. But it's because it's kind of the glue that is holding the community together. So even though the community has grown and is globally, it's still, wherever they go, they will find individuals that are similar or have the same interest. And so I spent quite a while thinking about, okay, so what's my culture in Canada, and other than Putin? And then I'm going, that's not a culture, you know, it has nothing to do with, it is based on economic situation, but in terms of the root of it is trying to figure out what we actually think is important for us in terms of culture. And so what I try to do is balance out in my classroom, and I give the Canadian perspective, but I can bring other perspective to it, and why that might create a conflict, why they would take different interpretation to certain things, and why we need to be more open to different perspective, because we're probably, other than the US, I think we're probably one of the most diverse community in the world, because we have a bit of everybody, and we're all in one area, as opposed to having, well, maybe that's a little bit different if you go to North Surrey now, where it's primarily one particular culture. But globally, you have the dominant culture in the countries, and then they try to eliminate all the minority cultures. And so there is like one culture. It's like in the States, you are American and anything else goes. And what I like about Canada is the fact that we like that melting pot where everybody contributes all of the little things. And that makes us richer and more enlightened in a lot of ways, because all of it is welcome. And I think that's what I try to bring with me. So some of the courses I teach are things like strategic management, international business, but in terms of international management. And a large part of that, it's dealing with the business, but it's that your business cannot survive in a country you're trying to develop and put your business in if you do not recognize culture, right? If you don't recognize the importance of the culture, you will have difficulty, because you will not be able to engage easily with the host country that you're going into. And that we can't dismiss it. It's about understanding it. It's about recognizing that it exists and having respect for it. Now, at the end of the day, for me, human rights trump all practices and all cultures. But we need to recognize that culture in many cases is something that they hold on to dearly. And it's about understanding how that can have an impact in the workplace. And from a management perspective, why we need to recognize it, and why we need to understand the influence it has, and what we can do to make sure that it's a more cohesive workforce or work environment. On the political side, I actually ran for mayor because I was mad. I ran for mayor of Surrey because I felt that they were not, it was one of the fastest growing, it is one of the fastest growing cities but it didn't recognize the diversity that exists. We had a platform that was 8 men. It's like, what are you talking about? We have women. How can the parties actually just, select men to run? And I thought, that's in 2018, that's not where you want to be for a city that is so diverse. The other thing was as well, the level of diversity, including looking at, do we have individuals from Indigenous population and people of color and things like that. And I felt that they needed more diversity. So I decided that I was going to run. I also had an issue with the person who was considered to be the favorite was someone who I felt had totally misused his office and didn't use it in an appropriate way. And so Coleman was in the Liberal Party and was the Solicitor General that basically ignored the fact that, they had all kinds of corruption and stuff going on in the casinos and all that kind of stuff. And I felt that that's not exactly what we needed to run Surrey. So I wanted to challenge some of those positions that they were putting forward, and I stuck my neck out and decided I was going to hang in there, even though most people thought that it was the stupidest thing I could ever do. And it's primarily because I felt that they needed a woman at the table. They needed female voice at the table. And that at the time was 2018. There was no way you should have an election that did not have your largest population group that's actually represented. So that's why I ran in Surrey. It was more a real activist kind of get in and kind of muddy the water component. So that's kind of why I ran there. And for the MLA, the NDP asked me, but I was also feeling that while they do cover and have a good distribution, I think 50-50, in terms of the individuals running, that they actually needed more diverse voices in terms of people of color and Blacks. It's been 34 years since Rosemary Brown, and I thought it was about time that they actually start to really look at the makeup of BC. So that's kind of what directed me in that to run on for those two offices.
And then, so obviously all of that took a fair amount of confidence and then resilience as you sort of went along.
I don't know.
How did you, coming from the perspective of someone who's quite a bit younger and all of that seems very intimidating, how did you develop sort of that confidence to put yourself in a position like that?
Oh, I'll be really honest and say that you have to talk to yourself a lot, and it's that this is what I want to do. And if it's something that is important and something you want to do, you just close out the noise and all that garble of people telling you that you can't do it. You're going to get nervous. You're going to have all of those things. It's about being prepared. It's about knowing what it's all about, getting the information before you go. And sometimes, even though I'm probably the last person to actually say this, sometimes you have to jump in the deep end to see whether or not you can swim. I can't swim. I did the jumping in the deep end. I survived, but I rely on others around me who can swim to make sure that they can rescue me if I'm really drowning. But it's also around connecting with individuals who's your support system. And if those individuals that really, think you can't do it and don't want, and all of those negative voices, just block them out. And it's like, okay, find someone who's going to actually support you and be that anchor. It's about just letting yourself know what the worst that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is I don't get the job, or I don't get that position. And then I learn from the experience. Okay, these are the things that I can do next time that would, give me a bit more confidence, or that would allow for me to address that particular issue better. or really I need to stay away from that person because that person is just a negative person when it comes to, you know, my own confidence. So it's not easy, and it's something you develop over time. I get incredibly anxious. I even get anxious when I go in front of my students, like, okay, who is going to say something way out in left field today, and how am I going to deal with it? Comes with the territory. Just, I think, believe in what you want, know that you can do anything you put your mind to. And if it's something you really want, don't let anybody tell you. Yeah, it's going to be hard sometimes. No doubt there are going to be people who don't want you to do it and might be negative, but you know, you will be fine, and you find those skills that will encourage your you know, encourage your confidence. And it sounds weird to say encourage your confidence. When you start out, it's about encouraging. You kind of ask yourself, why am I doing this again? And it's like, oh yeah. And then you focus on that, and it will guide you. And then when it's finished, you go, okay, these are the things that I learned. I use all of those things as a learning moment for me, and what I can do better, or things that it wouldn't have mattered. I think sometimes when you're with like an organized group, such as like a political party, there is you and what you believe, and then there is their perspective, and that becomes more difficult. And so what my campaign manager this time around, he was also with me during the mayor's election. I go to him and I say, okay, this is what they're putting out. This is a policy, but this is not what it's about. My perspective is very different. So there is the policy in terms of the political party, and there is your take on what that issue is. At the end of the day, you still have to decide that you have to be you. And I would not recommend to anybody that they actually follow something because if it's against how they believe. And then it's about having that private conversation that said, no, that's not what it's about at all. Or I can't answer it like that because it's totally against my values. And if it's against my values, then I can't address it. So it's about, okay, if I'm asked this question, what's the best way to address it? So one way of doing it is to put out my personal perspective and what the institutional policy is about, and find a way of, can I work with it or not? And if you can't work with it, then you can't address it because it will come up. You can see individuals who are trying to answer a question that you know that they're not being truthful about. And you can tell that that policy doesn't sit well with them, but they're going by, you know, the political stance. And that, I think, over a while will get to people's confidence because you're not confident about your answer. And so it's about finding the place where you can be confident about how you're going to address the particular question, or that you can't answer the question, or that it is the policy or the strategy of the party. And then you have to decide whether you want to stay with the party or not.
And sorry, you kind of mentioned, and it's sort of been an underlying theme, but of sort of your values, and not again to put you on the spot, but what would you say your values are?
Oh, geez.
Sorry.
No, it's a fair question. The problem I have with answering a question that is so big, it seems small, but it's really quite big, is there's so many aspects to it. I think the base of my values are principles that are ingrained in human rights, fairness, the equality, the acceptance of individuals, regardless of background or, you know, education or anything like that. It's about, at the end of the day, really, it's about treating people with respect and dignity. And those are core for me. Human rights, so to the center of what human rights is about is what my values are about. In terms of the operational side of it is more about equity and fairness and equality and inclusion. And those are the kinds of things that I guess I live with. I teach ethics, by the way, so that comes into trying to separate, okay, this is my own values and this is the values out there. You know, on a serious note, I think sometimes we really kind of embrace certain things because they're there and we grew up with them, and there are things that are key component for a family unit. And then as we get older, we realize, naturally, I don't think like my parents do. I don't think those are my values, or, you know, their values are structured in a certain way that I would question today because society has changed. So the core of my values haven't really changed. I've explored some of them and realized that at the end of the day, this is what it means. And it's all those things that I've just said to you. And I think if I had to choose to compromise them, it would make the difference with whether I take that job or engage in that activity or not.
I think that was a great answer to a very large question.
No, it's big. I think Lily's typing away.
That's,
We're taking some notes. So before just like kind of looking at some more of the present day things, what do you think that the role of women is in leadership during a pandemic? What do you think is important for us as future leaders and for us as current leaders and just women in general? What is our role in times like these that are so unique and so hard?
Wow, what is our role? I think our role is everything. What is our role during the, I think that's a tough question. I see I guess when you asked me the question, the first thing popped in my head was Dr. Bonnie. It's like, I believe in her. I believe what she's saying. I think she demonstrates confidence, and she does it with a smile and with a calmness that will make people want to follow what she's saying. So that's what popped in my head when you asked me. I think in general for women's leaders, it's about providing guidance. I think they see the issues differently. It impacts on them in a different way. In terms of, you have a lot of them in the emergency type frontline workers situation, but also they're probably the ones that are also keeping the calmness within the family and within, you know, the positions that they're in. I'm not by any means would say that they're always the best leaders. I think they have different perspective. And the reason I said that is because I've had a number of female bosses, and I'm like, yes, woman power. We have, you know, 2-3 levels of females, and we're going to work together and conquer the world. And along the way, I think for a couple of those leaders that I've had, they decided being women weren't going to be successful. They need to act more like men. It's how do I unravel that or unpack that? I think they felt that unless they could demonstrate at the table that they're just as tough and just as ruthless as the men, that would mean or equate to being an effective leader. And in the situations that we were in, it needed the reverse. I think sometimes, I think you can have incredibly strong women, and we've had them globally, women who go out and know what they have to do and they still provide strategic leadership. But we need to make sure that we hold on to that and that we don't lose that. it's not a trade-off, I think, in terms of them being women. I think women can be anything they want, and they can be effective in those positions. It's about communication. It's about relaying information. It's about making people feel that they can accomplish things and achieve things. And if we work together, the outcome is going to be much better than if we try to do it individually. That's kind of how I see women in leadership roles. I think we're far more cooperative and can still be a strong, dominant, strategic leader, but sometimes we kind of forget that other side, and we try to be more where the dominance create the primary focus. And that's not what they usually trade, at least what I saw demonstrated. What they trade off are what makes them really strong and effective women.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that leadership, strong leaders encompass both like masculine and feminine qualities of leadership.
Absolutely.
And I think that the importance of women leadership is having that voice. And I think that we live in a society that has been so male dominated that it teaches us that, like, it's starting to get to the point where it teaches women that, like, you can go out and you can do it, but you can only do it if you do it the way that a man would do it, which I think is completely not true. And what we need to be doing is teaching men and women and non-binary, gender fluid people that whatever they're doing, whatever that they want to accomplish, they can do in their own manner. And there's a million different ways to accomplishing things. There's a million different ways to being a great leader. There's a million different ways to achieving success. And it doesn't have to just be done through like the norm of society.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at what's her name, Legore, who is the head of the IMF, you know, she went in, she you know, a lot of people questioned why she was appointed. You know, I think, what was she? She was a swimmer. Oh, forgot. What is it called? The interpretive dance in the pool? Synchronized swimmer.
Synchronized swimming, yeah.
Yeah. But she went in with there, and people were kind of holding their breath as to whether she would actually be successful. And she was very successful, right? She went in with her own style and she made things happen and was very successful. You have Margaret Thatcher, on the other hand, that was probably the only woman at the table, right? With all the other political leaders around the world. And she accomplished so much, but for the men, they couldn't just deal with her as Margaret. They called her the Iron Lady, right? There's all of a sudden that she's acting, and she was doing exactly what they would have done in that position to get things done. But for her, it was a negative. For them, it's a positive, right? And so I think we're always going to have that, because frankly, I'm not sure a lot of the institutions are quite ready to have successful women. And so it's about the individual going in, having the confidence to know that regardless, as you say, their pronouns or whatever, that they can accomplish something, and they can do it within their own style and with their own attributes.
And so with that, I think we'll have to actually wrap it up.
Yep, no problem.
Because we just reached our hour. And so I really do appreciate all of that. And I'm sorry to cut off any other questions.
Not at all.
Or statements. Before we finish, I will just do a quick territorial acknowledgement. We usually start with it, but our conversation just started going. So we'll end with it. So before we end our interview, we would like to acknowledge that for Lily and I, we are in Victoria right now. So we'd like to acknowledge with respect that we live upon the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich Peoples Territory, and that their vital relationships with the land continue to this day. And so just want to sort of close off with that, because I think it's definitely very important that we recognize that.
Absolutely.
And so thank you so much for talking with us. That was super great. And I'm glad that Lily sort of made the connection so that all three of us could be here today. And I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, ladies, for taking the time. I think that we are going to have a great future if you guys, you know, are going to be leading the charge. So thank you for taking the time. And it was great fun having this conversation with you guys.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And I guess I'll just say a few things, and this will be cut out from the end of the video, but we will edit it, and when we upload it, which will probably not be for a couple months because we have a few more, but we will we'll make sure to send you a version for yourself so that you have it, and we can share the YouTube link with you as well. And we'll definitely be in contact for any other things. We are doing some panels, hopefully next semester, with various women leadership, and we'd love to have you on one of the panels. So we will reach out regarding any of those kind of events coming up too.
No problem. Well, thank you. And I know where to reach you, ladies, in case, you know, something comes up and I want you to come over and talk to one of my, once all this, the COVID thing's over, you know, come and have a chat with some of the young leaders that we might have that, you know, you ladies are on your way, and I wish you all the very best and good luck with your studies.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone has any questions, is it okay if we sort of forward those along to you?
Absolutely.
Okay, amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Have a good weekend. Bye.
And I'll talk to you later, Madeline.
Yeah, see you later. Okay, bye.